I wonder how often either you've asked somebody else or they've asked you that question, how are you? And it seems like in our culture today that the almost default response is busy. We almost wear it as a badge of honour that we're busy, that our lives are full, that we've almost got too much that we're trying to cram into life. I don't remember ever asking anyone that question and they said, I'm rested. And yet one of Jesus' promises to us is for rest. In Matthew 11, verse 28, we have a record of Jesus saying this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And this week we're looking at being attentive to rest, the final part of this Rule of Life series that we're looking at. And I want to encourage you to think about where is rest in your life and in your world. I know when I first took over leading Kerith, I was terrible at rest. And about 3 months into leading Kerith, I had a complete crash. I remember I was cycling home from meeting one of the local Anglican ministers, and I just thought as I was cycling, I don't feel great. Something a bit odd. And I got home and went to bed and basically was pretty much in bed for the next 3 months. And what had happened for the first 3 or 4 months of leading the church, I'd just run flat out and, working really hard and really anxious and nervous about taking over the leadership. And I'd been to Zambia and been to America and just kept going. And then hit this January crisis and it almost completely wiped me out through until Easter. One of the most humbling things that have ever happened to me. And I'd love to say that I learned a ton of lessons. I think I learned a few lessons from that. But actually, what I then settled into was a pattern where that never happened again. But every 2 or 3 months, I would get ill for 3 or 4 days. And I'd have like a fever and I'd be achy and have no energy. And I'd go to bed and be in bed for 2 or 3 days. And then I'd get up and I'd be okay again. And I'd keep that going for another couple of months or 3 months. And then it would happen again. And it almost happened like consistently through my life. And it was only 2 or 3 years later that I really began to dig into this whole idea of rest. The reality is when we don't take care of our bodies, someone once wrote that our bodies keep count. And if we don't allow ourselves to rest and give ourselves space to rest, eventually our bodies will enforce rest. That's what happened to me. And I long that we don't get to that place. So today I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about how do we need to live life with the rhythm that God intended us to have. And then I want to think about how is the Sabbath rest fulfilled in Jesus. So I want to start by saying this. God designed life to be lived with rhythm. Think of your heart beating. There's a rhythm to it. If that rhythm ever stops, it's bad news. You need to get out the CPR and do all that sort of stuff. And God designed life to be lived with a rhythm. There was a rhythm to the day. And we read this in the very beginning of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 says this, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." And there was a rhythm to that very first day. There wasn't just light and dark. That was part of the rhythm. But there were also times when God was working and times when God was resting. God did some work and then he stopped and he declared, "Hey, it is good what I've created." And he's pleased with what he has done. So God designed a day that has a rhythm to it. And we see that in our day. There's light and there's dark. There's times when we work and rest. There's times when we eat and times when we exercise. There's a different rhythm to the day. And one of the effects of modern technology often is that rhythm gets taken away. I think particularly with, you think of mobile phones. I know many of us sleep with our mobile phones next to our bed. The last thing you look at is your phone, and the first thing you look at in the morning is your phone. And there's this sense that you're on it the whole day. And science would tell us that that's causing enormous anxiety in the lives of people, that we're not designed to live with that. Is there another WhatsApp message come in? Is there another notification? Has someone else liked my thing? We're intended to live with that sort of anxiety and that pressure for moments in our lives, but not for the whole of our lives. But God didn't just define a rhythm for the day, he also defined a rhythm for the week. In Genesis 1 verse 30 we said this, God saw all that he made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work he'd been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And God didn't rest because he was tired. God is all powerful. He didn't need a rest. He chose to rest. And this idea of Sabbath gets written into the 10 Commandments. And the 6th commandment says this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you will labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. And out of those 10 commandments, which were designed to help us to live well and live in community with God and community with one another, Sabbath is enshrined in those laws. And God doesn't just ordain a rhythm to the day and the week, he also ordains a rhythm to the year. And that's not contained only in the seasons. We think of the seasons and, the season we're in now where it's cold, but we know that the days are getting longer and the weather hopefully is soon going to start getting warmer and summer will come. Just want to promise you. But also for Israel, there was a series of 7 festivals which they were called to celebrate throughout the year. Leviticus 23 talks about these. So speak to the Israelites and say to them, these are my appointed festivals. The appointed festivals of the Lord, which you're to proclaim as sacred assemblies. And there wasn't just a rhythm to the day, the week, and the year. There was also a rhythm to the years. And God declares that every 7 years there's to be a Sabbath year where they're to give the land rest. You could read about that in Leviticus 25. And then there's an even bigger one than that every group of 7 years, so every 49 years, there's a double Sabbath where the land gets 2 years of rest, and that's called the year of Jubilee, and all sorts of special things happen on that day. And I want to say this, that life works when you live it with rhythm. And there's a worksheet that we've developed around this week of the Rule of Life series, which is about being attentive to rest. And I want you to fill in that worksheet. I want to for you to create some space this week, or maybe you even stop this video in a little while and you right now stop and do this thing and you think about what does it look like to be attentive to rest, and where does God want you to develop rest in your life. And I want to encourage you to think about, where do you find a rhythm to your day? This was one of the keys to me de-stressing myself and stopping that cycle of getting ill. We need to have moments in our work days when we're working and moments when we're resting. One of the disciplines I've got is I don't have my phone next to my bed. So my phone isn't the last thing that I look at the end of the day and the first thing that I look at the start of the day. I don't have my work email on my phone, so I can't read my email. I have to do that at times when I'm sat down with my laptop. And I found all those things really helpful in terms of finding rest in my day, to have a period at the beginning of the day when I'm not working, and then have a moment in my day when I go, work's finished for the day, and everything else I get to do in the rest of this day is to relax and to enjoy people and to enjoy God and maybe have some time on my own. I'm going to have times when I work and times when I rest, taking meals seriously and actually stopping during meals, getting your phone away from the table and actually engaging with the people that you're with. So do you need to establish a rhythm to your day? Or maybe you need to establish a rhythm to your week, to take a weekly Sabbath. And I just want to be honest that this is the one that caused the greatest transformation in my life. After I had that first big crash, I put a bit of a daily rhythm into my life, but I didn't have a weekly rhythm. And I started a rhythm where, for me, Friday, Saturday are my 2 days off. So Friday will be a day to do like work and stuff around the house and, pay bills and do all that sort of stuff and do the washing and shopping and all of that sort of stuff. Then Saturday for me is my Sabbath. So it's the day that I stop and I don't do anything that looks like work, anything related to my job with church or around the house. It's a day for me to enjoy with people, for me to enjoy with God, and to stop and rest. And I just want to be honest, it's the most transformative practice that I've ever engaged in. And it's actually impacted and changed every other area of my life. Now, this will look different for everyone at every stage of life. If you've got little kids, it's going to look different. And I know some of the families in our church, they take Sabbath seriously, but it's a day just to, primarily during the day, enjoy with young kids. And the kids come into their bed in the morning and they have like pancakes and do whatever. And it's a day just to stop and be with family. And then maybe in the evening when the kids have gone to bed, have a bit more of a space to do some other stuff. I don't know what it might look like for you, but I've discovered that life works when I have Sabbath, when I take this weekly opportunity to stop, to rest, to contemplate, to enjoy God, to enjoy people, to be on my own, to do all of those things. The transformation that can happen in me between a Friday when I feel exhausted and the end of a Saturday when I've Sabbathed is remarkable. And I think God calls all of us to think, what does that look like in our lives? Then I think we need to think about a rhythm to our year. So holidays. One of the things Katrina and I will do in December every year is plan out the next year. And one of the things we put in place are the holidays that we're going to take. We know that if we don't do that, those times tend to get filled up and something gets booked in or something gets arranged and you think, oh, we were going to go away for this period, but we can't do that now. We're going to go away for this weekend. So we make sure that we have those things spread throughout the year. And so often, when you're in a busy season, hey, I can keep going because this is coming up. I've got this rest, I've got this space. And it often doesn't need to be anything spectacular. It's just, a few days out or, a house swap or whatever it might be. But I think we need to define a rhythm to our year. Holidays, pilgrimages, things like wildfires, things like, events for our kids that we're going to make sure that they get plugged into. Also retreats. One of the things I like to put in my diary sometimes when I'm just going to take a day away and go somewhere like Waverley Abbey and the Shepherd's Hut there and just have space on my own with God. And we need to know that our year needs to have a rhythm to it, that we're not just working flat out the whole time. And then even a rhythm to the years. I think some of us need to be challenged to think, what might it look like to take a sabbatical? Maybe to take a bit longer out if we have that capacity and that facility to contemplate our ways. I've got a friend who recently went on a 10-day silent retreat. And he said it's one of the most transformative things that he has ever done. It's really set him up for the next stage of life. And maybe you're at a point that you need something like that. So I really want to encourage you to print out the workbook and maybe even stop this video now. You can find the workbook on our website. You can either fill it in online or you can print a copy of it out and fill it in there. And you might even want to stop now and go, hey, is there one habit? And don't come up with 10. If you come up with 10, you won't do any of them. Find one thing, maybe related to the day or the week or the year or even the years that you're going to do and take seriously in terms of moving this forward. So, that's the first part. Second part I want to do more briefly, but I want to talk to you about a second question. And there's a really interesting thing if we look at the 10 Commandments in the New Testament, the bit of the Bible that was written after Jesus was around. In the Old Testament, the 10 Commandments are given to Moses for the people of Israel in order that they might live in relationship with God and people. And if you look in the New Testament, the bit of the Bible written after Jesus, 9 of those 10 Commandments you can find in the New Testament. But you won't find a command for Sabbath anywhere. And it seems like that commandment has gone. It isn't mentioned. It's mentioned, but we're not commanded to still obey Sabbath. Now, some people have suggested that was because it was so embedded in the lives of the early followers of Jesus that they just knew there's no way that they wouldn't have engaged with Sabbath. But the Bible suggests another reason for that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do Sabbath. I've just talked about how transformative it has been for me. But the reality is that Sabbath, this idea of resting, of trusting God, that He is going to keep everything going even if we're not working, points forward to something else, another reality. And the thing it points forward to is Jesus. Is that one day Jesus was going to come for the Israelites and He was going to usher in a Sabbath rest for them. Not just a rest from work, but a rest from having to strive and to work in order to be in relationship with God. And the Bible talks about this most clearly in the book of Hebrews, which is one of the books in the New Testament. And the writer to the Hebrews says this, therefore, since the promise of entering His rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them because they didn't share the faith of those who obeyed. Now we who have believed entered the rest, just as God has said. And we're saved not by works, but by grace. We're not saved, we're not reconciled with God, we're not made right with God because of what we do, because of our holiness or purity or our good works or, giving food to food bank or being nice to the neighbour or not kicking the cat or whatever it might be. We're not saved by good works. We don't earn our way to God. We're actually saved by Jesus and the good works that he did. And when we enter into that relationship with him, then we find a rest. We find a rest from having to try and earn and work our way to God, to just being in relationship with God, having done nothing to deserve it. And the work of Jesus Christ on the cross buys us rest. Rest from our sin, rest from our shame, rest from our guilt, rest from our fear, rest from striving, and it sets us free to spend eternity with God. And when Jesus comes to us and says, I will give you rest, that's the rest that he is referring to. It's this rest that we can find for our souls, for our spirits, for our being. Wrapped up in that is rest for our bodies as well, but it's a much bigger thing than just a physical rest. And I want to challenge you today, are you living in the rest that Jesus offers? Are you living in the grace of being in relationship with him, not through what you do, but through what he has done? It said of Jesus after he died on the cross, after his death and resurrection, he sat down at the right hand of the Father. That sitting down signifies that his work was done. And our work has now been done through him and in him. And we just need to simply receive that work by faith. So, maybe you're watching this today and you don't yet have a relationship with Jesus. You've never entered into a relationship with him. Well, today you can enter into that relationship. And if you want to know more about that, why don't you email us? Email info@kerith.church, and we will get someone to contact you to talk about how you can enter into that relationship with him. Or Google online for salvation prayer, and you can pray a prayer today to enter into that rest. Or maybe you have entered into that, but now you feel like you're working for your salvation. You're trying to be good enough. You're trying to earn God's favor instead of stepping into this Sabbath rest for your soul that Jesus offers. So today, I want to challenge you. Are you living life with rhythm? Are you living it with a daily rhythm, a weekly rhythm, an annual rhythm, even a rhythm for the years? Are there some changes? Is there one big change? Maybe like me, you need to adopt Sabbath. Maybe you need to make some changes to how you use your phone. Maybe you need to plan holidays and retreats and pilgrimages for this year. What's one thing that you could do that would get a physical rhythm into your life this year? And then secondly this, are you finding your rest in Jesus? Have you put your confidence and your faith in his work, or are you still trying to work to earn your identity and your status and your approval? Actually, is that what gives you validation and meaning and purpose in life, or have you found it in him? If you haven't, then enter into it. If you're struggling with it, come back to Jesus and accept his grace and his love and his rest all over again. So I really hope that's been helpful. I'd love to hear in the comments anything that you've been challenged by, maybe anything that was new to you about this, or anything that has spoken to you and that you're going to do differently. We'd love to hear that feedback, so please put that into the comments, and we would love to hear that. But yeah, I hope that's been helpful. I hope that you truly find your rest, that Jesus' command, Jesus' promise that in him you can find rest will be fulfilled in your life, and you would live your life out of rest. Amen.